So to glue up a table leg, these legs are going to wind up being about 4.25 inches square, and so what I've done is I've ripped the pieces. I want the legs 36 inches long, so I've ripped these. I've cut these pieces off at 38 inches to give me an extra inch on each end, and then I've ripped them to 3 3/4 of an inch because I'm going to put a veneer on each side, a thick veneer. I'm going to cut one of these boards, another board, in half and glue it to each side, and then trim that. So when you look at it, it won't look like it's built up like this. So the next thing we've got to do is get the glue put on these and get them clamped. And that's what I'm going to do next. Now I like to just take a piece of wood and smear it. All right, so I've got it clamped, and that's going to sit for a couple hours before I take the clamps off. And before I started, I put down some paper. This is some underlayment paper you can get like at Home Depot. It's kind of nice to keep your bench from getting covered in glue. But we'll let this dry, and then we'll come back. Now, the blanks are glued up, and it's actually been 3 or 4 days since I've been working on this. I've been at work. So I just wanted to point out, there's a crack right in here which didn't get completely pulled together, and because what I did was I put some rough boards in between, with some pretty good sized knots and splits and all kinds of stuff. All these are is just filler, and so the next thing we've got to do with this now is get it flattened out on this edge and this edge, and then what we'll do is run it through the joiner and get so this edge will be flat, and then we'll get this edge right here at 90 degrees to it. Now the way I'm going to do that is with my planer. you know, if you don't have a planer, you're going to have to use either a hand plane. You can use an electric hand plane. You could use a joiner to do this. There's lots of different ways to do it, but for me, that's going to be the easiest because I can very easily get this flat and get this side parallel to it and flat, and then come back on my joiner and get these to 90 degrees. Now when you glue these up, you're going to get some squeeze out of your glue. This one, I obviously put way too much glue on, but let it sit for about an hour, and after that get you a wide putty knife and come back and kind of knock off, it'll kind of come off like pudding, the thickened up glue, because when you come back to plane this later, you don't want all those knobs of glue sticking up because it's going to make it hard for you to get it flat. And then now that it's dry, I'll come back and see, like, I've got a hardened piece of glue there, and I can just chip that off, because otherwise when I run it through the planer, or you run it through the joiner, or you use a hand plane or whatever, your plane's going to run on top of that glue and kind of knock you off level. So the more little bumps and stuff you can get off before you start planing, the better you are. But that's ready. It's still, you know, it's not perfect, but that's ready to start planing. I'm getting ready to run this through, and I've got this is how my depth is here, you know. And so I'm going to start right there. I want to start shallow and slowly work my way down to get these evened up. Alright, now I said slowly. I, in one pass, got that completely cleaned up. So I'll just run the other three, and then I'm going to flip them over like that and run it one more time, and it'll get this clean. So now we want to get this edge parallel, or at 90 degrees to this edge. And so what we're going to do is, first of all, you got to make sure that your fence is at 90 degrees, and then you're going to hold it flat to this back fence. Alright, so we now have we're nice and square, and now what we got to do, so we have a flat piece here and a flat piece here, and so now what we got to do is cover this edge where there's all these individual boards. So it measures out, these measure at 3 7/8, and so that's probably going to be my final dimension, somewhere right around there, maybe 3 3/4 or something like that. It's not all that critical. But so I'm going to cut some pieces that are probably 4 1/8 that I'm going to glue to this side and this side to cover up that lamination. Now these boards, I could use one on each side, but I would have to plane them down to almost nothing when I got through. So I'm going to take these and rip them in half. That way I only have to use half as many. You could do this on a bandsaw, but I'm going to run them through my table saw. Alright, so I've gotten these pieces ripped in two, so I'm going to take the flat side and glue it on this side where you can see the different planks that were glued together. Now you want to try to match your grain up a little bit, and see I've got a white stripe right here, so I'm going to take the white part, well, this one will be better. Yeah, see I've got a white streak here, so I'm going to put it right there, so that matches that up pretty good. And what I'm doing is I'm going to glue one side of this. So I'm going to glue this on here, and then I'm going to run it through my planer to get this side flat, and then I'll come back and glue the other one on. If I put both of them on now, I won't be able to just run it through the planer because it could get it out of square. So that way it'll assure that I don't have to go back to the jointer and try to get one of the corners square again. Now to do that, I'm just gluing them just like I did before. A little bit of glue and hitting it with a foam roller. And you know, if like I've already done half of them, and so I didn't want my foam roller to dry out, so you just wrap it in some saran wrap and it'll stay nice and wet for you to do it the next time. Now you're going to probably want to put quite a few clamps on here because you want to make sure, you want to look down this edge right here and make sure that you have good contact. And I want it to overhang both sides just a little bit, so I'm kind of centering it up there. Alright, that's got it clamped. As you can see, you can never have too many clamps. But as I went back and looked, I had cracks where I wanted to go back and pull that down tighter. So it took a few more clamps than what I had originally thought it would. Well, it's the next morning, and these are all glued on there. And I'm going to take them over to the planer and knock this side off. That'll make it parallel to the back side. And then I'll flip them over and I'll glue the last piece on, and then I'll plane that off. And then after I do that, I'll get them planed to the correct thickness. So we're flat on both sides here now. And so the next thing I've got to deal with is now I have this overhang here. And if I just tried to run this through the planer, first of all, it's not flat, and I would wind up probably with a taper on here. So what I'm going to do next is take a router, and this has I've just got a trim bit in here. It's got a little bearing down here that'll run along here, and it'll trim this edge flush with this side. And I'm going to do that on all four legs. This is the four legs, and I just want to show you this view of it. Now this white paint is where I first sawmilled the logs, and I painted the ends white so they wouldn't check so bad. But just to show you the glue up on them. And then here's the thin veneer that we put on, and I've gotten them all planed to dimension now. And the next step is going to be I'll get them cut to length, and then I've just got to round over the corners and mortise them to hold the rails that will eventually hold the tabletop. Now I'm mortising out the grooves into the legs, and I'm using a mortising machine, but you know, I'm sure you're probably not going to have one of those. Probably nobody's going to make this table anyway. But if you, of course, if you don't have a mortising machine, then you can use a router to cut these out. You can do them by hand. You could do quite a bit of it on the table saw, but they're pretty deep, so you'd have to chisel out the last bit of it quite a bit. There's lots of different ways to make mortises, but this is just the way I'm doing it because I have the machine. Okay, the next thing I want to do is round over the edges. It'll kind of blend that veneer into the piece, and it also makes it smooth and friendly to touch. And this is my test piece that I've done, but I'm going to take all of the legs and run them through this router. This is that 1/8 of an inch round over bit, and I'm just going to run it over every edge except the top. So it'll be the bottom edge and all sides. So I round all four corners and the bottom.